Hello and welcome back to Underlab. Yes, it's going to be my first theory in ages. Finally, there's some really big things going on actually worth talking about. And of course, it all stems from Deltarune. There's 1,000 possibilities that everyone is discussing at the moment, so I've waited until I had a really good idea that could explain a lot. And this is the first theory I've come up with that could actually explain a tremendous amount about Deltarune. So let's get straight into things. Deltarune's story features us effectively being sucked into Narnia when we enter a closet with the school bully Susie and wake up in a place we're told is the Dark World. It seems like a fairly desolate and dead place at first, but we do eventually meet some very talkative individuals that remind us we're playing a game in the same vein as Undertale. The one I'd like to talk about in this video the most is Ralsei, as I'm convinced a great deal of the story hinges on this character. I've already mentioned in a previous video that Ralsei is an anagram of Asriel, and anyone who's played the first game knows how important a character Asriel is. So this theory is going to answer who exactly Ralsei is and why near enough everything that happens to us in Deltarune is actually their doing. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit crazy. So what's important to note is how we know Asriel is alive in Deltarune. On the surface world, we're told that he went off to university, and that explains why we never actually seem to meet him during our playthrough. Later on we meet the character Ralsei in the Dark World, who mysteriously has a name that's a jumbled up version of Asriel's. Many people don't seem to know what to make of this. Is it just Asriel, or is it someone else entirely? If it's Asriel, what's the need for a pseudonym? It can all be explained if we consider the possibility that Ralsei is lying to us, and I'm about to explain why. I believe without a doubt that Ralsei is in fact Asriel. Toby obviously didn't name Ralsei that and reveal him to be a dreamer by the end of the game for no reason. Not only do I believe it's Asriel, but I think it's the very same Asriel we're told about on the surface. You may think that's impossible, and even if it is possible, why would Asriel ever go to such lengths to conceal himself from his sibling? Well, it's all going to make sense fairly soon. The game truly kicks off with us entering a closet and descending into this strange new world. It's never explained to us why this happens, but I think I know what actually transported us to the Dark World. It was none other than Asriel's doing, as he intentionally summons Chris and Susie to help him on his quest. I know what those of you who have completed the game are already thinking, and don't worry, I'll be getting to your concerns soon. This theory explains a surprising amount about Deltarune. So, what doesn't make sense is how Ralsei seems to come from the Dark World. They claim to be a prince there, with no subjects, and they're one of the Darkners. It appears Darkners are all restrained to this realm, so Ralsei couldn't possibly be Asriel. Or could they? They could just be trying to convince us that they're not actually anyone we know. But why would they want to do that? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. I believe that Asriel actually wants to convince us that the whole of the Dark World is just a dream or in our imagination, and that he didn't really transport us to this potentially dangerous world. Now, Asriel isn't trying to drive us insane. I think the truth is actually quite innocent. When we escape the Dark World, we find ourselves in where the closet should have been, and there appears to be a chess set and several indications that everything we just experienced was nothing more than Susie and Chris being extremely creative. But let's face it, that doesn't make any sense. Susie does not seem like someone to play such an innocent game with Chris, and by the end of Deltarune, Susie was being pretty nice to me, as if we really had experienced a great big adventure together. Not only that, if we say it was a dream, how did two people have the same dream? No, none of that makes sense. But it probably doesn't make sense as to why Asriel would want to trick us into thinking that either. But consider this, how worried would Toriel be if she knew that her children were off on dangerous adventures in some strange world? I believe that Asriel wants to make us think that he's this Ralsei person so that he can complete his quest without making anyone worried, as everyone on the surface believes he's off to university. If Chris believes nothing actually happened, they won't go and tell Toriel and Asgore and make them worried. This also means that Ralsei's story might be made up, but the goal of it is still very much real. Asriel is trying to convince us that we're on some whimsical fantasy adventure, when in reality we are really trying to stem what seems to be a threat to the entire world. Once again, by not telling the whole truth, he manages to not scare Chris. You may be thinking that this seems quite cruel of Asriel, and therefore it probably isn't true, but consider this. Asriel isn't trying to be deceitful for a harmful reason. He really does need Chris and Susie's help, but he doesn't want them to be afraid, nor to make anyone else worried about the three of them. Asriel's quest is one of great importance, and he can't afford to take any risks. So far we've established a plausible explanation as to who Ralsei is, and why they might be lying to us. However, as much as it makes sense, you may still feel there isn't too much evidence for it. However, I've noticed a few subtle details while playing Deltarune that hint at this even more, and it's really quite cool how Toby has basically told us everything without giving it completely away. Here's something to think about. If it really is Asriel, why would he choose a name that can be so easily traced back to his own? Well, if you played the first game, it was well established that Asgore was pretty terrible with names, and we have no reason to assume that Asriel hasn't inherited that trait. That's right, Asriel probably called himself Ralsei because he couldn't think of anything better. We have to remember here that dreamers are incredibly innocent creatures for the most part, so even though Ralsei might be lying to you, I never suggested that he was particularly good at it. Another detail is that Ralsei wears glasses. While it could just be part of a disguise, I think it's very likely that Asriel simply needs them. Why would that be? Well, guess who else he's undoubtedly inherited traits from? Toriel, of course. And it just so happens that Toriel sometimes wears glasses. Asriel has inherited two obvious traits from his parents, just like how he got his name. But it gets even more interesting. Ralsei wears two colours in particular, green and pink. We all know from the first game that green is the colour of kindness, and pink is the closest to purple from the colours we already know, which indicates perseverance. I don't know about you, but I think the colours of kindness and perseverance are a perfect fit for Ralsei. Consider how hard he tries to help others, while not once considering violence. It feels like this is exactly how Asriel would have acted if he never had that unfortunate period of time where he was a flower. If you remember, when Chara died in the first game, he refused to fight the humans who attacked him, despite possessing great power. It was only after losing his soul and seemingly his empathy that he became nothing like Ralsei. Otherwise, I think this is the person he always would have been, and so Ralsei's personality is an even stronger indication that it's Asriel. Now, I have something extremely interesting to go into. Throughout the game, Susie is a bit of a menace. We actually have to go out of our way to warn monsters to avoid her if we're looking for a pure pacifist run. However, there's one pretty interesting detail when we actually have to fight her. Ralsei is capable of putting Susie to sleep by singing, which must seem like a very odd characteristic for Asriel to have. Asriel was never known for singing, or was he? As it turns out, we find out that he was part of the choir by talking to whom I presume to be the vicar outside of the town's church. This seems to be a slightly random detail in all honesty, and without this theory you could easily set it aside as being little else than flavour for the world. But doesn't it all seem to make sense if we consider that if Asriel is Ralsei, he would have needed to get in some practice singing at some point, and clearly he's pretty good at it if his lullaby can put Susie to sleep. Wow, so we really do have overwhelming evidence that Asriel is Ralsei. Well, it was pretty obvious really considering the name, but we've at least explained why Asriel might be choosing to use an anagram. So, let's recap over things. According to this theory, the whole Dark World is very much real, and Asriel is the one who brought us there. He didn't do it out of malice, but because he really did need our help. He chooses to disguise himself as Ralsei, but he's pretty clumsy about it, and we can actually see through it pretty easily. There's even a scene where we're in a jail cell together, and Chris and Ralsei have a discussion off camera. It's possible that Asriel revealed who he was in that moment and was explaining why he's having to do it like this. It could be something to do with Susie, or it might just be what I suggested, that he doesn't want to worry the likes of Toriel and such, a monster who is known for being overprotective. Don't forget what happened in the first game, where she wouldn't even let us leave the house. Ralsei has a lot of traits that tick them off as being a stereotypical dreamer, disregarding the fact that they are literally revealed to be a dreamer by the end of the game. Not only that, but they have a lot of traits we've seen in both Asgore and Toriel, from poor eyesight to bad with names, to being kind and perseverant. Though Ralsei has some elements to him we're unfamiliar with, such as being capable of singing, Toby has gone out of his way to establish that Asriel was in the choir in this world, so it really does all add up. I hope you agree this is a pretty compelling argument as to why Ralsei lied and why Ralsei is Asriel. Of course, it could just be someone with a similar name and a whole lot of coincidences, but that doesn't really seem like Toby now, does it? And there we have 10 minutes discussing what is merely a side character. I've not even gone into the clear influence Gasta has over the world, whether the game is actually a prequel rather than a sequel, or maybe even the world's first sidequel. There is so much going on in Deltarune that it's pretty hard to stay on top of. Either way, I'm excited for what the future may bring. Toby has given me every reason to have faith this game is going to be something extraordinary, and on the off chance he decides to watch this, thank you for talking to me that one time. That's all for now as there's plenty left to explore, and I just want to keep digging. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.
Hey, where was I this whole video?